All right, so today we're diving deep into something that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but it's actually being seriously considered around the world. Universal Basic Income, or UBI for short. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Free money for everyone. Really?
Yeah, it definitely has that kind of futuristic ring to it, doesn't it?
It does. But we're going to break down exactly what UBI is, why some folks think it's the answer to, like, all our problems, and why others think it's a complete disaster waiting to happen.
It's a really fascinating concept when you start to peel back the layer.
It's absolutely. So for anyone who's not familiar with this idea, let's start with the basics. What exactly is Universal Basic Income?
At its core, UBI is actually a pretty simple idea. It means every citizen gets a regular payment. A set amount of money, no strings attached.
Like literally just money in your bank account every month, no matter what.
Exactly. No need to prove you're looking for a job or anything like that.
Wow. Okay, I can already see how this is going to be a controversial topic.
Oh, for sure. It raises a lot of questions about work, fairness, and like the whole structure of our economy.
Right, because, I mean, free money sounds great in theory, but how would it actually work in practice, and how could we possibly afford it?
Those are the big questions, aren't they?
They are. So to really get into the nitty-gritty here, let's talk about why UBI is even on the table in the first place. What's pushing this idea into the spotlight?
Well, I think there are a few major trends converging right now that are really making people take UBI seriously.
Like what?
Well, one of the big ones is obviously the rise of AI and automation.
The robots are coming.
Yeah, sort of. But not necessarily in a Terminator kind of way, at least not yet.
Right.
But seriously, AI and automation are already changing the way we work, and they're only going to become more prevalent in the future.
We see it everywhere, right? Like self-checkout kiosks, factory robots, even those chatbots that answer your questions online.
Exactly. And a lot of experts believe that these technologies are going to displace millions of workers across a wide range of industries in the coming years.
Okay, so that's where the UBI argument comes in, right? Like, if the robots are going to take all the jobs, we need some way to make sure people can still, pay their rent and buy groceries.
That's the thinking. UBI is being explored as a potential solution to mass unemployment caused by automation.
A sort of safety net for the age of robots.
Precisely.
I'm getting a little nervous just thinking about it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely a big unknown.
Okay, so we've got the robots potentially taking our jobs, but is that the only reason people are talking about UBI?
No, there are other factors at play as well. For example, think about the rise of the gig economy.
Right, with more and more people working as freelancers or independent contractors.
Exactly. And those kinds of jobs often lack the stability and benefits of traditional employment. No paid vacation, no health insurance, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a lot less secure than having a regular 9 to 5.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so UBI is also being considered as a way to provide a basic level of income security in this increasingly precarious job market.
Makes sense. So we've got the robots, A&D, the gig economy shaking things up. Anything else driving this UBI conversation?
Well, there's also this thing called the productivity paradox.
The what now?
The productivity paradox.
Yeah.
It basically means that even though technology is making us more productive as a society, we can produce more goods and services than ever before. The benefits of that increased productivity aren't being shared equally.
So the rich are getting richer and the rest of us are kind of stuck?
That's a simplified way of putting it, but yeah, there's a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots.
And UBI is seen as a potential solution to that.
Exactly. It's being explored as a way to redistribute wealth and ensure that everyone benefits from technological progress.
Interesting. So we've got job displacement from automation, the rise of the gig economy, and this widening wealth gap. It's like a perfect storm brewing.
It kind of is.
Okay, I think I'm starting to understand why people are taking UBI seriously, but the big question for me is, does it actually work? Has anyone actually tried this out in the real world?
That's where things get really interesting. There have actually been a number of UBI experiments around the world, and the findings are, well, they're pretty surprising.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me everything.
All right, let's start with Finland. Between 2017 and 2018, they gave 2,000 unemployed people 560 euros per month. No strings attached.
Wow. And what happened? Did they all suddenly find jobs and become millionaires?
Haha. No, not exactly. It didn't really have a significant impact on employment rates, but it did lead to some pretty interesting results.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, people reported feeling less stressed and anxious,
I can imagine.
and their overall mental health improved.
So even if it didn't lead to more jobs, it seems like it had a positive impact on people's well-being.
That's what the data suggests.
Fascinating. What about other experiments?
But there was also a pilot program in Ontario, Canada, where they gave a select group of people 1,400 Canadian dollars per month.
That's a bit more generous than the Finnish experiment.
Yeah, it was. And they tracked a bunch of different outcomes, not just employment rates, but also things like health, nutrition, and work-life balance.
And what did they find?
Well, it's interesting. They actually found improvements in all of those areas. People reported feeling healthier, they were eating better, and they had more time for family and leisure activities.
Wow. So it sounds like UBI actually had a pretty positive impact on their lives overall.
It seems that way.
But wait, didn't you say this program was cut short?
I did,
Why?
because of cost concerns.
Ah, there it is. The eternal dilemma.
It seems like even when UBI shows promise, a price tag is always a major hurdle.
Yeah, I can see that being a problem, especially if we're talking about scaling this up to a national level.
Exactly.
Okay, but before we get too deep into the financial weeds, I'm curious about one thing. In these experiments, did people just stop working altogether once they started getting free money?
That's a common concern, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's human nature to want to avoid work if you can, right?
To some extent, sure.
Yeah. So what happened? Did everyone just decide to quit their jobs and live off the UBI?
Well, not exactly. There's actually a really interesting example from right here in the U.S. In Stockton, California, they ran a pilot program that gave $500 a month to low-income residents.
Okay.
And the results actually challenged some of the assumptions about UBI and work motivation.
Really? How so?
Well, one of the findings was that many recipients actually found better jobs after receiving the basic income.
Really?
Yeah. It seems like having that extra financial cushion actually allowed them to be more selective about their job search and to focus on finding something that was a good fit for them.
So it wasn't about giving people an excuse to be lazy. It was about giving them the resources to find something better.
That's the idea.
That's pretty compelling. It kind of flips the script on the whole UBI will make people lazy argument.
It does.
Wow, okay, so these real-world trials are giving us a lot to think about. It seems like UBI can have a real impact on people's lives, both in terms of well-being and even their job prospects. But I have to admit, the question of how to fund this on a larger scale is still swirling around in my head.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. How do we pay for this? Let's dive into that next. What are some of the ideas being floated around for actually funding a UBI program?
Okay, so let's tackle the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Funding. How do people propose to fund something as massive as a universal basic income?
Well, it's definitely not cheap, but there are some pretty compelling ideas out there. One that's gaining traction is a robot tax.
A robot tax. So, like, are we going to have little Roombas with IRS agents chasing them around? But seriously, how would that work in the real world?
The basic idea is that companies replacing human workers with robots or AI would pay a specific tax. The revenue generated could then go towards funding a UBI system. It would sort of make automation contribute to the well-being of the people whose jobs it might be displacing. So, making the robots pay their fair share. Are there like specific models for how this robot tax could actually be structured?
There are a few different approaches being considered. Some people propose taxing companies based on, like, the number of robots they use. Others suggest taxing the profits generated specifically by automation. And of course, there are tons of debates about what the percentage should be and how that revenue would actually get distributed.
Sounds like there's still a lot to figure out, but it's definitely an interesting concept. What about other funding options? What else is on the table?
Well, another idea that comes up a lot is a wealth tax. This would mean higher taxes on the ultra-wealthy, so billionaires and megacorporations.
Right, the idea being that those who benefit the most from the current system should contribute more to a system that benefits everyone. Makes sense. But haven't some people raised concerns about a wealth tax discouraging investment and potentially slowing economic growth?
Oh, absolutely. There are valid arguments on both sides. People who support a wealth tax argue that it could generate a ton of revenue without actually stifling innovation. Critics worry it could drive investment overseas. There are also a lot of ongoing debates about how to actually define and measure wealth and what percentage should be taxed.
Sounds like there are no easy answers when it comes to funding UBI. What about streamlining existing welfare programs? Could that free up some resources?
That's another avenue people are exploring. The idea is that if you replace the bunch of different complicated social programs we have now with a single, more streamlined UBI system, it could potentially cut down on administrative costs and be more efficient overall. It would make things simpler for those in need and could maybe free up funds to make the UBI payments more substantial.
Less bureaucracy, more support for people who need it. I like it. Are there any other ideas for funding out there? What else is being discussed?
There's also been talk of resource taxes. This would mean taxing things like extracting natural resources, carbon emissions, or financial transactions.
Okay, so the thinking there is that those activities generate a lot of wealth and often have negative side effects, so taxing them could both generate revenue and also encourage more sustainable practices, right?
Exactly. A sort of double win, funding UBI while also incentivizing better behavior.
I like that idea. So it seems like there are a lot of different options on the table for funding UBI. It's clearly a major challenge, but maybe not impossible to overcome.
Right. There isn't one perfect solution. It'll likely require a combination of different strategies to make UBI a reality.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the potential benefits and drawbacks of UBI. Let's start with the good stuff. What are some of the potential upsides?
Well, one of the most compelling arguments is its potential to completely eliminate poverty. By providing everyone with a base level of income, you could guarantee that everyone has their basic needs met, no matter their circumstances.
That's a powerful thought. Imagine a world without poverty. It seems almost too good to be true. Are there any other potential benefits besides just addressing poverty?
Absolutely. UBI could also have a significant impact on entrepreneurship. If you have that basic income safety net, people might be more likely to take risks and start their own businesses. That could lead to a surge in innovation and creativity, driving economic growth.
Right, because it takes away some of that fear of financial ruin if things don't work out. Makes sense. But wouldn't it also, I don't know, take away some of the pressure that drives people to innovate in the first place? Could it make people complacent?
That's a valid point. But it's important to remember that UBI is meant to be a basic safety net, not a life of luxury. People would still want to work to make more money and improve their standard of living.
So it's about providing a foundation, not eliminating the incentive to work altogether.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where people can pursue both their basic needs and their aspirations without that constant fear of falling through the cracks.
I'm starting to see the appeal. What about the impact on things like health and education? Could UBI potentially lead to a healthier, more educated population?
There's a strong argument to be made for that. If people are less stressed about money, they can focus more on their well-being and potentially have better access to things like healthcare and education. They could have more time and energy to pursue those opportunities and, as a result, contribute more fully to society.
It sounds like a win-win. Better lives for individuals and a stronger, more vibrant society overall.
Exactly. UBI has the potential to create a sort of virtuous cycle where individuals are empowered to thrive and everyone benefits from their contributions.
Okay, so we've talked about potentially reducing poverty, boosting entrepreneurship, improving health and education. Are there any other upsides we should consider?
Well, there's also the potential for greater economic stability. Putting more money directly into the hands of everyday people could stimulate demand and increase consumer spending. And that could have ripple effects throughout the economy.
So it's not just about providing a safety net, it's also about potentially boosting the overall economy.
Right. UBI could be a tool for creating a more robust and resilient economy that works for everyone.
Okay, you've painted a pretty compelling picture of the potential benefits, but let's be real, no policy is perfect. What are some of the concerns people have about UBI? What are the potential downsides?
Well, one of the most common criticisms is that it could actually reduce people's motivation to work.
Right, that whole why work if you don't have to argument.
Exactly. But, as we talked about earlier, the evidence from those real-world experiments is kind of mixed. Some studies showed no real impact on employment, and others even suggested people actually found better jobs.
So not a guarantee that everyone will just quit and watch TV all day.
It's likely much more complex than that.
Okay, what about inflation? Isn't there a risk that if everyone suddenly has more money, prices will just go up and then the benefit of UBI is lost?
Yeah, that's a very valid concern. Economists are still debating the relationship between UBI and inflation. It's complicated and depends on lots of factors, including how it's funded and how the economy responds. Some people argue that UBI could actually help control inflation by providing a more stable source of demand, while others are worried that it could lead to prices shooting up.
Sounds like there's a lot we still don't know about how it would actually play out in the real world. Are there any other potential downsides?
Well, another concern is that it could be incredibly expensive to implement, obviously. It would probably require significant changes to our tax system and, could lead to higher taxes for some.
Definitely something to consider. Anything else?
Some critics also argue that UBI could lead to people becoming dependent on government assistance and might discourage folks from taking responsibility for their own lives.
So potentially creating a culture of dependency rather than empowerment.
That's the argument. But it's important to remember that UBI is designed to be a safety net, not a replacement for work or personal responsibility. It's about giving people the freedom to make choices that are right for them, whether that's pursuing education, starting a business, or taking care of their family.
Okay, yeah, I see both sides of that argument. Seems like with any big policy change, there are both benefits and risks to weigh. It's not as simple as saying UBI is good or bad, it's complex.
Exactly. It's really important to approach this topic thoughtfully and consider both the potential upsides and downsides.
Well, you've definitely given me a lot to think about. I can see why this is such a debated topic. So if we were to kind of sum up this part of our deep dive, what would be the key takeaway?
I think the main takeaway is that UBI is a potential solution to some of the biggest challenges we're facing. But it's not a magic bullet. There are both promising benefits and legitimate concerns that need to be carefully considered.
Well said. Now, I'm kind of curious to explore the bigger picture here. We've talked a lot about the economics, but what about the societal and maybe even philosophical implications of UBI? How might a guaranteed basic income change the way we think about work or even our own value, our place in the world?
That's where things get really fascinating. UBI isn't just about money. It challenges a lot of our deeply held beliefs about work, success, and what it means to be a productive member of society.
I'm ready to dive into that. Let's explore the deeper implications of UBI and how it might reshape the world as we know it. Okay, so we've talked about the potential economic benefits and drawbacks of UBI, everything from reducing poverty to concerns about inflation. But I think there's this whole other layer we need to explore, the potential impact on society as a whole and how we view ourselves.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. UBI isn't just an economic policy. It could be a catalyst for a fundamental shift in how we think about work, about value, our place in the world.
Okay, unpack that a little. Right now, our worth is often tied to, our productivity, job title, how much we make. How could UBI disrupt that?
Just imagine a world where everyone, no matter if they have a job or not, receives a basic income. That sends a powerful message. Your value as a human being is not contingent upon your job or your income.
It's like saying you matter because you exist.
Exactly. And that kind of shift in thinking could have huge ripple effects throughout society. It could challenge those hierarchies where certain types of work are seen as more valuable than others based on, sometimes pretty arbitrary factors.
Yeah, like prestige or earning potential.
Exactly.
So a stay-at-home parent, a struggling artist, a community volunteer, their contributions would be recognized in a whole new way.
Precisely. UBI could free people up to pursue work that is meaningful, regardless of whether it's highly paid or traditionally seen as valuable.
This could be a game changer for so many people. Artists, caregivers, activists, social entrepreneurs, all empowered to chase their passions without that constant pressure of financial insecurity.
And it goes beyond individuals. Think about the power dynamics between employers and employees. If workers are less desperate for a paycheck, they have more power to negotiate for better wages, benefits, working conditions.
It could shift the balance of power towards labor, make things more equitable.
And it could lead to businesses focusing on creating more fulfilling and meaningful jobs, rather than just squeezing out as much profit as possible.
So we're talking about a potential shift in values from a work-obsessed society to one that prioritizes well-being, purpose, individual fulfillment.
It is, and it's gaining traction as more people question the way things are now.
What about the potential psychological effects? How might a guaranteed basic income change how people think about themselves, their place in the world?
That's a big one. I think UBI could have a huge impact on people's dignity and self-worth. Imagine a world where everyone, no matter what, is seen as deserving of basic economic security.
Yeah.
It could foster empathy, compassion, a sense of shared responsibility.
It's like building a foundation of security and belonging for everyone.
And on an individual level, UBI could reduce so much stress and anxiety that comes with financial insecurity. It could free people to focus on passions, relationships, personal growth.
Just taking a weight off their shoulders, allowing them to breathe.
Exactly. It's about creating space for people to live more meaningful lives.
I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a little hopeful. Even if UBI doesn't solve all our problems, just having this conversation, imagining new possibilities, feels like a step in the right direction.
I agree. The fact that we're having this conversation globally is a sign that things are changing. We're questioning old assumptions, exploring new ways of organizing society.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We've looked at the benefits, the challenges of UBI, the economics, the social side, even the psychological effects. But at the end of the day, I think the most important question is, what kind of world do we want to live in?
That's the question, isn't it? What kind of future are we creating for ourselves, our kids, the generations to come?
Do we want a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, or a world where just a few benefit while others struggle?
Do we want a world driven by fear and scarcity, or one where everyone feels safe, valued, and empowered to reach their full potential?
These are the questions I hope our listeners will think about even after this deep dive is over.
Because ultimately, the future is not something that just happens to us. We create it through our choices, our actions, our collective vision for a better world.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of UBI. It's been a truly thought-provoking conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, please keep the conversation going. What are your thoughts on UBI? What questions do you have? Keep those minds curious and keep diving deep. Until next time.